Hey everybody, and welcome back to Jim's Garage. On this channel, you know I love a bit of Portainer. But what if I told you there's a free and open source container management called Komodo that does most of what Portainer puts behind a paywall for free? Now, it doesn't quite have the same feature parity, so things like the identity and access management providers aren't as robust, nor does it do Kubernetes, which might be a deal breaker for you if you're using it to manage your Kubernetes infrastructure. But for pretty much any home labber and probably any sort of small enterprise, this could be a perfect tool for you. Some of the key benefits are the ability to pull and build images through the UI, as well as deploy stacks, much like Portainer does, but also to build some powerful automations. So you can actually script things to do things in a certain order. So you can tell it to build or pull images, build them. You can even put in custom code, custom commands, custom scripts, etc. into those pipelines, effectively making a CI/CD, and you can also tie it into things like GitHub or your own personal repo. It's pretty cool. Now, I'm just getting started on this, so this is my initial impressions, but by the end of this video, I'll have walked you through the setup process, and I'll have also given you a demonstration of what it looks like and spinning up some containers, etc. Now, what's also good about Komodo is it doesn't have to just do the single host. It can also, much like Portainer, you can manage many servers through this, apparently almost limitless according to the documentation. So now let's head over to VS Code. Here we've got the two files that we need. So we've got the Docker Compose file with all of the services, and we've got the respective env, which it will call and make use of for things like this. So the first thing we've got is Mongo itself, so the database. We're going to set up the database. We're going to give it some persistence. It's going to be using some Docker volumes to store this, and it's going to set up a username and password here. Now the ports we don't need to open up because it's going to be on this network here. It's going to spin up a network called default. All of these containers are going to be on that network. Next up, we've got the core, which I think is sort of the web UI from what I can tell. So the interface that you're going to be talking to. That's going to depend on the database being available here. And it's also going to require a connection to this database here. And we'll be accessing it through port 9120, and you can change that if you needed to. And in the future, I might come back to this and add a reverse proxy like traffic, for example. But in the first instance, you're unlikely to have a proxy up and running anyway, so you might want to be accessing it through an IP and a port. You can actually specify, and you might be able to see that in the env file when we go through it, you can specify your own certificate already if you've got one, so you could access it through HTTPS with a valid certificate off the bat. But I prefer to do things and manage it through traffic just because it makes life easier, it's got auto refresh, etc. So once we've got that set up, and we're also going to set some volumes for the repository cache, we've then got one final container called periphery, and the periphery is what actually connects in the back end to the Docker SOC. We've got some volumes that are going to be created for various different things. Here you can see, for example, if you put the SSL cert in here, that's what it can actually use. We've then got the volumes being created down below, and we've also got that network default being created. Now, one thing to note is it's obviously a little bit more involved than just spinning up Portainer, which you can do with a single Docker run command. Whether that's an issue or not, because pretty much Compose, once you've got it right, it's set it and forget it. But anyway, let's hop into the env file. Let's see what's going on in there. There's a ton of stuff actually that you can tweak in here. I'm going to leave it as the default just to get this up and running so you can see it. But obviously you'll want to go through that and tailor it to your needs. So in here, we can see that we've got a load of different things that we can set. So for example, we can use which version of Komodo we want. I'm going to use the latest one. That's the default. Makes sense for doing this. It also seems as though you could use this for Podman, albeit there's something that needs to be set here. Now, I might do that again in the future. I am keen to revisit Podman. I've done that sort of a year and a half ago, and I suspect there's been a lot of change since then. You'll obviously want to put in a random passkey for the authentication between the core and the periphery containers. And then we actually get onto some of the core environment. I'm just going to leave this as the demo, but obviously if I was going to put this behind a reverse proxy, I would change this host to something like komodo.jimsgarage.co.uk. Next, we get onto some settings for polling the different servers. And like as I said, this can manage multiple Docker servers. So whatever your polling rate is, you'll want to put that in here. The following secret section, you'll obviously want to use a strong random secret. Now, because I'm not going to be using OIDC, I've just got this set to the local authorization true. But if you wanted to, you could obviously set that up. You can also here as well set up whether you want new users to be able to register or not. Here you would actually set whether you want OIDC on. So if you remember from my previous videos where we go through authentic, when you actually generate those credentials, it will give you all of the sort of callback addresses, the client IDs, the secret. You'd want to come in here, uncomment them and paste those in. That will allow you then to sign in through Komodo through your own identity provider. You can also use GitHub for your sign in as well as Google OAuth. And you can also use AWS, which I believe it can also plug into as well for managing some of your containers. The Komodo periphery environment as well also has some keys that you would want to generate. It defaults to having SSL enabled, and that's pretty much all we need to do. So like I say, I'm leaving this as default, so it should just be a simple case now of firing up the terminal, changing over to this Docker Compose folder, and running a sudo docker compose up-d. Now with any luck, that should go away, pull all those containers and spin this up. So that all looked as though it spun up properly. So hopefully now we can head over into the incognito window. And if I put in this IP address and the port we specified earlier, we should reach the home page. So in this instance, it's .126 and port 9120, which is the default. Hopefully hit and return. Yeah, we've got to the login page. So it's a little bit tricky here. But all you have to do is create a username and password, and instead of clicking login, just click sign up. So if I go with the ever secure admin and password and hit sign up, we should be in. And so here we are in the UI for the first time. You can see that this server, i.e. the default server, this is what it's running on, is this one here, conveniently named JCYAQ. And if we click on that, you can see the virtual machine I've got 4 cores, just shy of 4 gigs of RAM and 12 gigs of disk space. Now, if you actually clicked on the servers here, you can add a new server. So you could add another Docker host, for example, and you could manage it through here. I don't believe it supports Docker Swarm, but I'll have to go and check on that. But going from top to bottom over here, we've got the resources tab, which basically shows all of your servers and builders. We'll have a look at that later. And then also the containers that are running. So at the moment, we know that we've just got those 3 containers. That's basically the 3 containers that are required for Komodo to work. On the left, we've already looked at servers, but if we have a look at stacks, stacks are basically what you would do in, say, Portainer, whereby you can copy a Docker Compose file and spin up a new container. We'll do that in a minute, but I want to go through the menu first. Next, we've got deployments, and this is basically where you can create your own deployment without an existing stack. So in a stack, you've probably got a Docker Compose file you're going to put in. In a deployment, you basically create all of that yourself. So you add the network, you add the volumes, etc. And you'll do that through a UI. So for example, if we hit test, you can see here that we've basically got the server that you want to put it on. You've got the image, so you could put in here, say, Pi-hole. You've got the network mode you might want to try, any environment variables you want to pass, any volumes you want to create, etc. And a whole host of other stuff just on the other side. So what you want the restart policy to be, auto updating, etc. Auto update is pretty cool. It's almost like it's got its own built-in watchtower. Then we get onto the stuff that I haven't really covered before, and that's largely because this is behind a paywall in Portainer. It might be something now that I've got this freely available that I actually play with, and that is all of the stuff down here. So builds, repos, procedures, actions, builders, alerters, and even templates. So the builds are pretty interesting. It basically builds that Docker image for you. So usually you have to do that through the command line. You might pull something and then you might do, say, a Docker build, but this gives you a handy and convenient user interface to do that for you. So once you've created one, you basically go through and you say, well, where do you want to build it? So which builder do we want? We want this local builder. I believe you can choose other ones. So for example, if you had one on your network, a different machine, and it was set up and configured as a builder, you should be able to select that one. You can then go through a lot of the things that you would normally find in things like your Docker file, for example, and you could actually build out that image. So for example, you would tie this into something like a repo. Doesn't have to be GitHub. I believe you can choose your own, so a custom one, for example. So it could be something like Gitty, which we've looked at before. Type in the repo name, the branch, etc., path to the Docker file, and then hopefully, along with all of the other advanced options, you should be able to pull down and build that image. Next up, we actually manage all of those repos. Add a repo here, so I could clone my GitHub, for example, if I had it for building Docker images. And then once it's added in here, I should be able to reference it throughout the application. So the procedures is pretty cool, and as it says at the top, it composes Komodo actions together. So if we created a new procedure, for example, what we could do is basically add stages. And this would be a little bit like, I guess, especially when you tie it up with the actions and the builders, a bit like an Ansible playbook, where you might do something first whereby you pull something, then you build something, then you tell it to spin it up, and then, I don't know, you do a load of other stuff off the back, say do health checks or do checks for new versions, etc. And so, for example, here we've got this webhook. We could add a stage if we wanted to. We could say what kind of execution do we want. So it can be a run, a batch run, a run action, a run build, all of the stuffs that you would naturally associate with kind of a CI/CD pipeline. So we could pull a new deployment, start a deployment, restart it, all of those sorts of things. And there's a ton of stuff in here that I'm still learning, so as you can probably tell by the way I'm talking, I'm not an expert in using this within Komodo. But now that I've got this, it might be something that I start to implement into my home lab, because I haven't really done that before. Next, we've got actions. So this is custom scripts using the Komodo client. So again, I haven't really played too much with this, but what's cool is it basically takes a script and will do something with it. So I'm assuming in here we can tie in some actions, and we can also put in things like a webhook URL, and maybe when it does this action, it can actually create an alert and tell us, which we'll get onto later on. The builders, as I said, we touched on that before for builds. So we've set this local server up as a build server. But again, because this can manage multiple servers, you might have another server within your network that you want to assign to being able to do building things. So you could remotely use it. Maybe that machine has got a lot more horsepower, different types of acceleration, etc., that might make it more adept to making build files, etc. Then we've got some alerts, which is quite cool as well. So having some custom alerting, we can set this up to do certain things. By default, this is obviously going to send the alert to, I believe, this instance on localhost. But I do want to play with this and see, for example, could I send an email, for example? Could I send it to Gotify? All of those sorts of things. The templates looks pretty cool as well. It says it's going to deploy more cloud-based servers on a button click. So let's just have a look. It looks like we can actually then deploy straight into the cloud. And I think as we saw in the environment file, we saw things for AWS and Hetzner. So if I do AWS, I'm guessing it's going to say, yeah, which region, and then it's going to ask for my AMI ID, etc. So it does look as though it can sync up with a AWS environment, and obviously if you are deploying into the cloud and you've got a Docker environment in the cloud, I suspect you can have all these powerful CI/CD things pushing into the cloud, which is really awesome. Maybe I'll spin up a small cloud instance and I'll have a play with that in a future video. Now, I'm not exactly sure what syncs do, but I suspect it's something to do with inter-host behavior. So if I do UI defined, although you can do files on a server and a Git repo. And then looking at the bottom, we've obviously got the alerts themselves and the updates. And if we're heading to settings, we can see that we can set some variables. Not entirely sure what they're for yet. Some tags for various things. We've got different providers for our Git accounts and registry accounts. We've got some user management here. Now remember, we're not using OIDC or any third-party authentication provider, but here we can manually assign new users and dish them out, and we can also change obviously our password here. So let's just keep this simple. Let's spin up a new container using a stack. So the good news is obviously my GitHub is full of Docker Compose files. So I'm going to go away now, grab one of those and spin something up. So I'm going to use IT tools, just because that's an easy one. So once we're in here and I've gone and copied the compose file for IT tools, You want to make sure that this server is set to the server we're on, or whichever one you're going to use. And then we need to choose the mode for actually setting up this stack. Now I'm going to use UI defined because most of you, if you're using Portainer, might put your stack through that, or something like Unraid, for example. But it is good to see that if we've got files on a server, we could select a file. And also if we've got a Git repo, so for example my GitHub, if you forked that or if you've got your own, you should be able to tie it into your Git repo, which obviously you would specify over on the repo section over here. So I'm going to use UI defined. And then that opens up this kind of compose file and all the various options below it all the way down here. So hopefully if I Control A all of that and hit Control V, here you can see that we've got the compose file which I set up for IT tools. I need to keep remembering that that's now deprecated. But basically here we've got the compose file. I'm going to just leave all of this as is. I might actually get rid of all of the traffic labels just so it doesn't get confused. And I think we had default as the network it's set up when we first did this. So if I put in default here, this should now put it onto the same network that Portainer and everything is using. And I'm not going to change any other environment variables. I'm not going to specify a .env file, but it would default to .env, which is good anyway. For something like IT tools, which doesn't actually have any persistent data, I'd probably want to poll for updates and automatically update it, because maybe there's new tools, fixes, etc. That might be useful. Everything else down here, we can specify some project names. If we want to do anything pre-deploy, again, we could do some execution in the shell to do certain tasks beforehand. We might want to put some extra arguments. So it's given the example here. Maybe sometimes you want to specify a different compose file name, or you want to do, say, a force recreate, something like that. We can also tell it to ignore certain services and exit early. We can choose a different image registry if we wanted to, so where we're actually pulling that Docker image from. And it's saying it's going to pre-pull the image before running a deploy. Now, once we scroll up to the top, you see why it might want to do that. Because we have the option here to basically pull the image and then deploy it, or we can click deploy and it automatically should pull that image and then try and deploy it. I think we need to click save because we've obviously added in this compose file, so we're going to click update. And you always have to get used to this. Click confirm again. So that should have done it. Now you can see in the top right that that has saved. And now hopefully what I can do is click deploy, and again we want to confirm. That should go away and pull, but why didn't it? The network default couldn't be found. Okay. So let's go back down and let's just try a new one. We'll call this one just IT tools. IT tools. And we're going to get rid of the external true because we're going to get this compose file to create it. So now hopefully if we hit save, we can update that and it shows us what's changed. Great. Maybe now if we hit deploy, let's see what happens. Yeah, brilliant. So now it's deployed the stack and it says it's running. So hopefully if we go back to containers, yeah, we can see the IT tools is running here. If we click on that, what do we see? We get the log of what's happening and it all spinning up. That looks great. I'm not sure if there's actually a way to exec into the container. I haven't found that yet, but maybe there is. Obviously in Portainer, that's a really handy tool. But now with that container running, and you can see here it's put it on the IT tools network, it's created that. I want to just check actually, because I think I did something stupid. I don't think I put any ports. Yeah, those ports were actually commented out. So I don't know what happens now if I save this, update, confirm, and then I redeploy. I wonder if that will now apply. Let's see. So it says it's redeployed, and hopefully if we click on that, everything looks fine. It says it's started up. So hopefully if I go to this same IP address up here, but in this case we want to do, I think it was port 8080. Let's see if that works. So with any luck, we should be greeted with IT tools, and yes, we are. Perfect. So basically this is behaving very similar to Portainer. So if you are looking to come from Portainer over to Komodo, a lot of that behavior, a lot of the syntax, a lot of the naming conventions are pretty much identical. So that's going to be a wrap for this video. Like I said, this is my first initial impressions of Komodo as an alternative to Portainer without that paywall. And I'm really impressed so far. I would arguably say it's got way more features than I've typically been using through Portainer anyway because of that paywall. So I'm looking forward to getting stuck into some of these things, maybe building some automations, using it to actually create some of my build files in a user interface, because I'm a bit of a noob at heart. I quite like a user interface. It makes life easier. I don't know why you wouldn't want to use it. So I'll try and put that through its paces, and I'll probably do an update video or send out some tweets or whatever in the future saying how I get on with it. But let me know if this is something that you're going to try, or whether you've already been using it for a long time and what you think the differences are between this and Portainer. I'm really excited to see how I get on with this, so fingers crossed. Anyway, if you've liked this video, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe. I'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.